It's Father's Day here in the U.S., and so today it's all about dear old dad and the shoresh Alef Bet Yod. Welcome back to Hebrew Vocab Boost. I'm Sapir, and today, in honor of Father's Day here in the U.S., I'm going to talk about the shoresh Alef Bet Yod, which the Academia says is the root of the words Av and Abba. Both of these words mean dad or father. Now, there aren't too many words with this root, but there are plenty of compound words. So let's get started. So the traditional word that means father in Hebrew is Av. And this is a little bit more of a formal way to say father. It can also mean ancestor. And then it can also mean like the source of something. And so it's not generally the way that anybody would actually refer to their own father. It's certainly not a term of address when you're talking to your dad. Some form of this word appears over 1,000 times in the Tanakh. And so, as you can imagine, I did not have time to analyze them all. The word does have two singular construct forms, Av and Avi. And they are both found in the Tanakh. In fact, they're both found in Genesis. And so let me show you those right now. So Genesis 4:21 says, V'shem achiv Yuval, hu haya avi kol tofes kinor ve'ugav. And the JPS translates this as, and the name of his brother was Jubal. He was the ancestor of all who play the lyre and the pipe. So here we have avi, and that's the it's in construct with kol tofes, all who play. And just a few chapters down the line in Genesis 17:5, we have Velo yikre od et shimcha Avram, v'haya shimcha Avraham, ki av hamon goyim nataticha. And the JPS translates this as, and you shall no longer be called Abram, but your name shall be Abraham, for I make you the father of a multitude of nations. So there we have Av in construct with Hamon Goyim, many nations. So you can see they're only a few chapters apart, but both forms, Av and Avi, are used in construct, and they're used in very similar situations to describe a man who is going to be an ancestor of nations. The plural of Av is Avot. And this is irregular because, of course, Av being a father is going to be a masculine noun. And in the plural, it gets the feminine ending. Ot is usually for feminine words, and im is the masculine plural. But this is actually not so uncommon in Hebrew for a masculine word to have a feminine plural ending and vice versa. I'm told that this is because way back in ancient history, these two plural endings were not actually related to the gender of the nouns. And then once they became associated with gender, im being mostly for masculine and ot being mostly for feminine, the words that already existed and had the wrong ending in the plural, that was already kind of set in stone, and so now they're just, considered irregular. It sounds plausible, but I haven't actually studied it, so I don't really know. The form avot is the regular form, what they call the absolute form, and so it just means fathers or ancestors. But it can also be the construct form, so it can also be fathers of. And Avot also often refers to the patriarchs of Judaism, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So, like I said, I've never actually heard anybody refer to their dad as Av. Mostly the word that is used is Abba. And this is a word that came into Hebrew from Aramaic. And I feel like that's kind of a little bit obvious by the fact that it ends with an aleph. Now, I'm not saying that every single word that ends with an aleph is from Aramaic, but it is really, really common that Aramaic loanwords into Hebrew end with an aleph. I think this is because, now I'm just speculating here, I think this is because the aleph suffix is a definite article in Aramaic. Now that I'm not speculating about, that is definitely a feature of Aramaic. But what I am speculating is that this is why loanwords into Hebrew end with aleph so often. I think that just basically when they come into Hebrew, they come in with that suffix, that definite article suffix on there, and they just leave it there. So this has also happened with Arabic loanwords into Spanish and English, other languages. The Arabic definite article is the prefix al. And so if we think of like alcohol and algebra, in Spanish they have almohada, which means pillow. All of these words, the al was just the prefix that means the, but it became a part of the word when it got brought into the other languages. So that's my theory about why so many Aramaic loanwords in Hebrew end with an aleph. Woo! I digress. Anyway, Abba is the way people refer to their dad all throughout their lives. Sometimes you'll see it as meaning daddy. If you watched my video on the shoresh Alef Mem, which had to do with mothers a few weeks ago, I said the same thing about the word mom. Ima means mom, but it often gets translated as mommy, but that's not really accurate because that's what I would call my mom, and I'm 54, and I would never call her mommy in English. And the same thing with Abba. It can mean daddy if it's a kid talking to their dad, but it also can just mean dad because that's what an adult would call them as well. Another short diversion. My son calls my husband Abba. And we don't really live in a Jewish community, and so he is the only Abba around. And when we went to Israel and all the kids were calling their dads Abba, my husband was just constantly turning around thinking my son was talking to him because he kept hearing the word Abba, 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 and he just was not used to it at all. So it was kind of funny seeing him reacting to all of these kids calling their just talking to their own dads. So there is also a word abahut, and this means fatherhood or paternity. And this is the way the Academia writes it, with a dagesh in that bet. But I've seen it in all of my other dictionaries as avahut or even avhut. And then, just to prove that Hebrew is not immune to adding suffixes on top of suffixes, we have avahutiut, which means paternalism. I found that gem in my Oxford Hebrew English dictionary. Abahi means fatherly or paternal. And just like with abahut, this one shows up in my dictionaries as avahi or avhi. All right, now we're on to compound words and phrases. And we are going to start with dads and other fatherly type figures. So avzaken literally means old father, but apparently it can also mean grandfather, although I've never ever heard anybody actually use this to mean grandfather. There's a word saba, and that means grandfather, and that's the word that I've heard everybody use. But this is all over the dictionaries. The Academia has it, and all my dictionaries have it as meaning a grandfather. Av choreg means stepfather, and that's the word that anybody would use for a stepfather. This one's not necessarily a father, but we have Av Beit Din. And Beit Din is a Jewish religious court. They settle religious matters. And so Av Beit Din is like the head of the religious court, or the president, or he can also be like the presiding judge in a particular case. And this phrase can also be said Rosh Beit Din, which means Rosh is head, so like head of the Beit Din. And in other compound words, where Av doesn't necessarily mean a father or even a man, it can mean the first of something or sometimes the main thing. And so we have Av HaOrkim or Avi HaOrkim. And this is the aorta. Orek is an artery, and so this is like the main artery. And so the aorta is the main artery. It's the one that pumps the blood straight out of the heart to the other parts of the body. And so in Hebrew, the aorta is like the father of the arteries. Tum'ah is impurity. And so Av HaTum'ah would be the source of impurity. So this can refer to any source of impurity, like the body of a dead person, or I'm not quite sure what else would make us impure. I feel like this is kind of a spiritual impurity type of thing, not necessarily like germs. It can apparently also mean the main reason for something like a social event. I don't know, I've never actually heard this one out in the wild. Most of these I really don't hear all that much out in the wild. But when I find them in multiple dictionaries and multiple sources, like when the academia has it and all my dictionaries have it, then I feel confident in sharing them with you. Avtipus, now this is one that I have seen in the wild. This is a prototype. So like the very first thing of an invention or of something new. So Av here is being used kind of like the prefix proto. And then tipus is an ancient borrowing from Greek to mean type. This goes way back to post-biblical times. The word prototype doesn't go back to post-biblical times, but the word tipus does. And avdegem means a paradigm. And now this one was, I did want to look this one up because paradigm is not a word I think I have ever used except in relation to grammar. So I looked it up on dictionary.com, and their first definition is a framework containing the basic assumptions, ways of thinking, and methodology that are commonly accepted by members of a scientific community. And the second and the third definitions had to do something with an example or a model, and that sparked my interest because the shoresh dalet gimel mem has to do with examples and models. Dugma'it is a supermodel. Dugma is an example. But then at the same time, I noticed that paradigm is para plus dime. And dime is D, G, and M. And I thought, well, is it related because of that? And the answer is yes, it is. Apparently, there is an ancient Greek word, digma, or something like that. I'm sure I'm not pronouncing it correctly. That means like a sample or a specimen. And those three sounds, the d, the g, and the m, came into Hebrew and became a shoresh of all kinds of things, meaning samples, models, examples, stuff like that. And again, this is way back when in post-biblical times. All right, binyan, we usually think of it either as like a verb category or a building. And what kind of joins those two definitions is that it really kind of means a structure. Binyan av is generally defined as a standard rule or a general law. And I think it might be something like a rule of thumb. I'm not 100% sure that definition fits, but I think it might be something like that. Tofes is a form or a template, and mismach is a document. And so Tofes Av and Mismach Av both are, if you think of them as the first document, they are the original from which copies are made. So I think in English, we generally would refer to that as the original or the master. And Tochnit is a plan, so Tochnit Av is a master plan. Av Melacha. This one is related to halacha, which is Jewish law, how we are, all the rules that we're supposed to follow. And Av Melacha refers to any one of the 39 main categories of work that are not supposed to be done on Shabbos. So I'm sure we all remember that Hashem created the world in 6 days, and on the seventh day he rested. And this is why on Shabbos we rest and we don't do any work. But if you ask everybody about what is work, we would all kind of have different definitions. There are certain things that if I do them, there's no question it's work, right? Like if I go to a job and I get paid for doing whatever it is I'm doing, clearly that's work. But that's not what we're talking about here. When we talk about work that we're not supposed to do on Shabbos, basically it's almost like we are supposed to leave the world as it is. And so it's so hard to describe. We're not supposed to light fires, right? Because that's making a change. But if there is a fire going, we are not supposed to turn it, we are not supposed to extinguish it either. And so there's, you will sometimes hear people saying, oh, I like to work in my garden. It's relaxing. It's not work for me. So why can't I do it on Shabbos? And the answer is because you're changing the world. And so in order to basically let everyone know, let all the Jewish people know what is considered acceptable and what is not considered acceptable on Shabbos, there's a whole list of 39 different categories of activities that are considered work. And all of these activities all of these categories are called Avot Melacha. So one of them would be Av Melacha. So of course there are plenty of Jews. My family is one of them. We were growing up. We were basically Jewish in name only, and so my family never thought twice about doing whatever it is that we wanted to do on Shabbos. But of course, the more religious, the Orthodox and the Hasidim, the Haredim in Israel, they take these rules very, very seriously and break them only if it's like a life and death situation. So back to the idea of Av as father, we have the word Bet Avot, which means like a nursing home or a retirement home. It's basically somewhere where the parents are going to go when they get a little bit older. And now we have 3 phrases that are all euphemisms for when someone has died. We have Ba El Avotav. He came to his ancestors, right? We can figure out what that means. There's also Ne'esaf El Avotav, and that means he was gathered to his ancestors. So basically the same thing. And there's also Shachav Im Avotav, which means he lay with his ancestors. Or it sounds like you would actually probably say this one more in the present tense. Hu shochev im avotav. He's lying with his ancestors. And these 3 all feel quite poetic to me. There's a verb lamut, which means to die. It's very matter of fact. And when I was not so great with my Hebrew, I would say, when I said somebody died, I would say who met. And all of my teachers would correct me and say, oh, hu niftar, which I think is more akin to like he passed away. So that's the more polite way of saying that someone passed away is hu niftar. So these other three euphemisms that I just mentioned, ba el avotav, ne'asaf el avotav, shachav im avotav, I think they're even like more so, a little bit more maybe literary or poetic. They're just a little bit more, they're not like the normal way to say somebody passed away. So on that happy note, that's it for today. Now you know a bunch of terms related to the shoresh Alef Bet Yod, meaning dad. Sadly, there is no Father's Day in Israel, but there is here in the U.S., and it is today. So to all the men out there, and especially my own dad, I wish you all a happy Father's Day. As always, if you have any questions or feedback, please leave it in the comments. Hit like if you enjoyed this video, and subscribe and hit the notification bell if you want to see more. Lehitraot bapa'am haba'ah. See you next time.